and I am also the chair of Accessibility Task Force of EPUB 3 Community Group in W3C. It's great to present again in the Digital Publishing Summit, and I'm really excited because this is the morning session. I remember last year I also presented. It was a good presentation. The only thing was that I was in the afternoon session and there was some technical glitch in connecting my computer to the projector, and it gave a good time to audience to have a nice afternoon nap. Well, everyone wake up before the presentation, but I'm glad that we are in the morning time and all of you are well caffeinated. So the presentation should go well. So the presentation is all about how to ensure that your users are able to discover the great accessibility of your publications, what publishers need to do, and what retailers need to do to achieve it. It will take about 30 minutes approximately to present this along with the demonstration, after which we will have a round of questions and answers. I will like to say that I am the visible face of the great team which is working on this initiative. We have Madeline and Graham who are driving the harmonization of the schema.org and Onyx metadata. Gregorio and Charles are the editors of the document, and Christina, Luke, George, Matt, and representatives from the publishing industry are providing us the guidance since the inception. Let's start from a poll. How many of you have used the accessibility metadata? The poll is on the Swapcode app. We will keep the poll open throughout this session and looking forward to the results. So I think we are all set to start. We have a nice audience already waiting for the real content of the presentation. So Daniel, whenever you are ready, you can start moving the slides. Let's start from slide 2. It's so great to see how publishers are putting wholehearted efforts for making their publications accessible. I'm impressed when I come to know from my friends in the publishing industry how they are following the EPUB accessibility specifications, how they are gaining knowledge from the Accessible Publishing DAISY Knowledgebase, and how they are extensively using ACE for identifying and fixing the accessibility issues in their publications. All this to ensure that the people with disabilities are benefited from the efforts of the publishers. You have really done a good amount of efforts, and now you send your publications to the retailers and the distributors, and now you feel relaxed because you are ensured that your publications, the accessible publications, will bring a big smile on the faces of people with disability. I'm sure such a smiling face is somewhere in your minds. But what if later on you realize that the people with disabilities are not able to benefit from the great work that you have done? Just because the people with disabilities are not able to find and discover on the retailer's website that your publications have the great accessibility features for meeting their needs. What if your publication look like just another publication by another publisher who have not given much attention to accessibility? Isn't it frustrating? All your great efforts on accessibility have gone waste? So what's the solution? How can we overcome this challenge? Let's see on slide 5. The solution is simple. You need to ensure that your publication has the required accessibility metadata to convey the accessibility features that your publication has. And the retailers and distributors need to display this to your users in a meaningful way. Sounds simple, isn't it? Yes, it is simple conceptually. But when you get into implementation, you see a long laundry list of accessibility metadata. You get confused what to choose. So one of the frequent questions I receive from the publisher is, which are the most important accessibility metadata that we should have in our publications. Let's go through the list in slide 6. As per EPUB accessibility specifications, the following accessibility metadata are most important: accessibility summary, accessibility features, access mode sufficient, accessibility hazards, access mode, conforms to, certified by, and certified credentials. So now you know which are the accessibility metadata that you should be adding. You add the missing pieces to your publications and then dispatch it to your retailer and the distributors, assuming that the work is done. You may be thinking that retailers and distributors will just pull out this metadata and display it to the users. Let me show you what kind of strange things appear if the retailers decide to pull out the accessibility metadata and show it to your users as it is. Let's move to slide 7. So here is what you will see. At least I cannot understand it. Maybe Daniel or Gregorio maybe understand it because they are more technical. But I don't think that users will be able to make out much from this. So these strange things will appear because the accessibility metadata is machine readable. Onyx has quotes. On the other hand, schema.org has the machine readable strings. It was the time that we realized that we have done a great deal of work on accessibility metadata, but we missed out the usability factor, how this metadata should be displayed to the users in a user-friendly way. And the solution was development of a guidance document for the retailers and distributor, which provides the best practices for displaying the machine readable accessibility metadata. Slide 8. This work was started in EPUB 3 community group in W3C to encourage broad participation. Just a note here, the EPUB 3 community group will soon be renamed to the publishing community group in W3C. The name of the document is User Experience Guide for Displaying Accessibility Metadata. And we have 3 main objectives. The first one is to identify which are the most important accessibility metadata fields for the end user. As you know, that there are a lot of properties of accessibility metadata, but it can also cause clutter. So it was important to identify the most important information for the end users. The second objective in the list is obviously the guidance how to display it in a user-friendly way. And the third objective is to harmonize different accessibility metadata formats so that the user gets the same information from the user interface no matter which accessibility metadata format is used by the publication. It may be Onyx, it may be schema.org, or some other metadata format. With this, we thought that we are all set to move forward. But then we realized that there are more challenges. One of the challenges was that the industry is not dependent on a single metadata format. One way was to harmonize these metadata formats and then work on these documents. But this would take years to complete. Another challenge is that the metadata formats are updated quite frequently. Onyx is updated every 3 months and schema.org is also work in progress. Another question was whether we should confine these documents to EPUB publications or we should be having a broader view. Obviously, EPUB publication is the starting point for us, but it would be good to keep flexibility of expanding it to other publication formats. So how to balance all these factors? We required both stability and flexibility. So we decided to solve this by structuring the document in a way to allow both. Slide 9. The document is designed in 2 layers. One is the principles layer and below there is the techniques layer. The principles layer is abstract. independent of metadata formats. It defines which metadata information is most important for a user with disability and how it should be displayed. This layer is supposed to be stable for a long time, and the first revision of the principles would be released soon. Below this, we have the techniques for different metadata formats. The techniques define how the metadata information has to be extracted from the machine readable accessibility metadata and how it should be interpreted. The techniques document will be updated more frequently as soon as we have updates from Onyx, schema.org or from other metadata formats. Right now we have two techniques document, one for Onyx and one for schema.org plus EPUB accessibility metadata. There is a good chances of having another document for the Mark 21. As we will move along, we will add more techniques documents. To explain it in a nutshell, the retailer will use the techniques for extracting the information from the machine readable accessibility metadata in Onyx or in schema.org format, and then it will use the principles to display it in a user-friendly way. Now let's move to some concrete outcomes of our work and let's dive into the principles to understand it. Let's move to slide 10. Here is the list of principles. The first one is screen reader friendly. As the name suggests, it informs that the publication works well with the screen readers, that all the meaningful text is accessible to screen readers, and all the non-textual elements like images have the text equivalent. The next field is audiobook. It indicates that the publication is an audiobook. You do not need to display this field if the publication is not an audiobook. This is done to control the information overload, as we know that the proportion of audiobooks is quite less as compared to the text-based publications. Next is accessibility summary. It describes the accessibility features as well as the accessibility limitations of the publications in a human readable way. You can imagine it as a couple of lines or a small paragraph provided by the publisher which describes the capabilities, the accessibility related capabilities of the publications. If this is done in the right way, it becomes very helpful information for the users. In future, we also plan to develop a guidance document for the publishers for informing them how to write good accessibility summary. The next one is accessibility conformance. This is one of the most important fields. It informs which is the accessibility specification to which the publication conforms to. In this example, you can see that the publication conforms to EPUB accessibility WCAG level AA. Then is certified by. It informs which is the entity that has done the accessibility certification. It can be a third party, an independent certification agency, or it can be the publisher by itself. Then is certifier credential. It shows the name of the agency which has accredited the third party certifier. It can also have the logo or badge of the accrediting agency. Let's move to the next one, the certifier report. It's a URL or a hyperlink. Many times the publisher or the third-party certifier would like to have a link to the online accessibility report. The accessibility report may be having the details about the accessibility features. It may be generated by the DAISY Smart tool, or it may be an online certificate provided by the third-party certifier. Then is hazards. Sometimes the publications may be having some accessibility hazards. For example, there may be animation with flashing lights, which can activate seizure in some readers. There may be similar kind of hazards with some kind of sounds or some other pattern of light also. So the hazards field is very important to warn about such issues. And at the end, we have a pointer to the list of all accessibility metadata. It can be a hyperlink leading to another page, or it may be HTML details element which contains all the machine readable accessibility metadata. Why do we require the whole list? Well, there are two reasons. The first one is that the advanced users may like to dig in more details for finding the suitable publications for themselves. The second important reason is that the complete list of accessibility metadata provides a base for checking whether the retailer has interpreted the accessibility metadata in the right way. Let's move to slide 11 to get an overview of techniques documents. So as I mentioned earlier, the principles tell you what information should be displayed and how it should be displayed, and techniques inform us how this information should be extracted from different metadata formats. As I mentioned, we have two techniques documents right now, one for ONIX metadata and one for schema.org plus EPUB metadata. Let me take some examples to explain it further. Let's take the example of audiobook from the principles. If we need to extract this information from schema.org plus EPUB metadata, we will look for access mode sufficient equal to auditory. If we find this field, then it's an audiobook. Similarly, on the ONIX side, we will look for code list 81, code 01 for audiobooks. Let's take another example of accessibility conformance. If we want to extract this information from schema.org plus EPUB, then we will look for DC terms conforms to. It will be having a URL that identifies the accessibility specification to which the publication conforms to. And if we have to take this information out of ONIX, then we will look for code list 196, codes 02 and 03. For more details about techniques, you can go through the respective techniques documents. When you will be going through the techniques documents, you will find some missing techniques. For example, for screen reader friendly, we have techniques in schema.org plus EPUB metadata, but we do not have techniques right now in ONIX metadata, because the harmonization of both the metadata formats is going on right now, and soon we will be having more techniques where you find the missing pieces. I would like to thank to Madeline and Graham for leading this effort of harmonizing the two metadata formats for accessibility. Here you will also find a link to the crosswalk of accessibility metadata of schema.org to ONIX metadata. Now a question may be coming to your mind: is this documentation ready? Well, the principles document will be available quite soon because it defines the high-level requirements. On the other hand, the techniques document will remain work in progress for some time. The techniques document for schema.org plus EPUB is nearly ready and you can start using it. But the ONIX metadata techniques would take some time. You may also be thinking that all this is quite impressive, but is the industry really ready to implement it? Well, I am pleased to inform you that VitalSource became the first one to commit to implementation of user-friendly accessibility metadata, thanks to Rick Johnson. Further to it, other major entities in publishing industry have been contributing to this guide, which includes Hachette, Redshelf, Macmillan, Random House, and more. Another good news is that the new version of Ace App by Daisy also has a metadata editor. The strength of ACE is that it enables you to check accessibility of the publication no matter what kind of production workflow you are using. So now you can check the accessibility of your publication with the ACE app, and at the same time you can correct or add the missing accessibility metadata also with ACE app. And I have also heard from Loha that in long term, Thorium also plans to implement the user experience guide for accessibility metadata. Now I will pause there and would request Daniel to provide you a demonstration how to edit or add accessibility metadata using ACE app.
All right, and I'm back in the room. So just making sure everything is running fine in Zoom. Let's have a look. Yes, it seems to be going all well. So this is ACE app. This is a desktop app that can be installed on Mac, as is the case now. I'm running this demonstration from my Mac computer, or from Windows or Linux. And as Avnish mentioned, ACE is a tool that can be used as part of your production workflow to run evaluations on your EPUB publications against a set of accessibility rules. A number of checks are being performed, including checking the accessibility metadata as per the standard, the schema.org standard that Avnish presented. So let me just switch to my file explorer here. I have prepared a publication. This is Accessible EPUB 3 publication authored by Matt Garish and a few others. But this publication was created a number of years ago, I believe 2012. Back in the day, we really didn't have the standard that we have now for accessibility metadata. So as good as this publication is, it is missing some metadata. Let's have a look. So I'm just going to drag and drop the file onto the ACE app window. The evaluation is now finished. It only takes a few seconds in the case of this publication because it is a small publication. With larger ones, it might take quite a bit longer. What I see here on the screen is the report, a summary of the report. And I can see that in the EPUB category, I have 4 serious errors. There are also moderate errors, minor warnings, and so forth. Let's switch to the violation tab. A violation can be an error or warning. And if I scroll down the list, I can see that I have a number of them. In fact, I have 17 in total. So that's not really helping me to pinpoint exactly what is wrong with my metadata. So let's move to the metadata tab. Here I have a summary of the metadata that is available in the publication. We have the DC creator, so that's Matt Garish. We have the date, 2012, and so forth. If I scroll further down the list, there is a section that is showing me what accessibility metadata is missing in this publication. Some of them have a label attached to them, such as access mode. This is a serious violation. It means that the metadata is required and it is missing. Access mode sufficient, on the other hand, is a recommended metadata field, and it is therefore a moderate violation in the terminology used in ACE. Some of them don't have a label at all because there are optional metadata fields. They're not required, they're not recommended as per the strict validation rules. Going down the list, or rather scrolling down the window here, ACE is telling me that there are violations, and there is a link which I can click to jump to the violations. Let me do this. There we are. So I'm back in the violation tab, but this time the table is showing me only errors or warnings related to metadata. And that is thanks to the filter on top the table here, which allows me to select different fields that I want to focus on. So we have 4 serious violations or missing metadata that is recommended by the required by the specification, and we have 1 moderate error here. I want to fix this. How do I do this? Go back to the metadata tab, scroll all the way to the bottom, and there is an edit button. When I click on it, ACE displays a pop-up dialog, a modal overlay on top of the main window. And the layout of this pop-up editor is as follows. Right at the top, in the top right corner here, there are 2 links to the DAISY knowledge base. The first one, and I'm going to click on it immediately, shows some documentation, very helpful documentation, about accessibility metadata. So if I'm a bit confused about what each field, what information each field should contain, I can use the DAISY knowledge base to have a quick reminder. So for example, accessibility summary here not only explains to me what it is for, but also gives me examples on how to author it directly in the XML or HTML syntax of the documents. That is, of course, for advanced users, expert users. The second knowledge base link gives me information about evaluation metadata, or as Avnish presented it, conformance metadata. So here we have the conforms to metadata field. We have certified by, certified credentials, and a ton of useful information. In the top right corner of these documentation windows, there is a big red link that says Go Online. I can do this now. All that does is taking me to the actual website where the DAISY knowledge base is hosted. So this is a live instance of the documentation hosted at daisy.org. So what we are seeing from inside ACE is a cached offline version of the DAISY knowledge base. Means I can use it even if I am offline. All right, let's go back to the metadata editor. So this was the top right corner with the links to the DAISY knowledge base. The bulk of the window in the center area is the actual editor. The layout is simple from top to bottom. Each row is a metadata field. Let's start with the first one here. We have schema access mode. There is a red marker that signifies that it is a required metadata field that is currently missing. It is therefore an error. Immediately below it is access mode sufficient. Now this one is recommended as per the specification. It is an orange marker, it's not red. So it's more like a warning. And we have here accessibility feature, hazard, and summary. All these fields are missing from the publication that I am fixing or remediating. So ACE automatically populates the editor with the most important metadata, that is to say, that is missing. There are, of course, other fields, as Avnish presented. If I now go to the very bottom of the editor, there is a list of all the fields that I can use here, such as Accessibility API. If I click the plus icon button, it will add it to the list. There it is. And when I place my mouse cursor or my keyboard cursor inside the field, there is a list of predefined values. In the case of API, ARIA, A-R-I-A, is the most common used value, so we'll use this. And so forth. I can pick from the list, and we'll have a look at interesting fields in a moment. But let's go back to the ones that were already presented to us in the editor. Starting from the top, we have access mode. Again, when I place my keyboard cursor in the field, I'm presented with a pop-up list of predefined values. Here I have, for example, textual. Let's pick this one. now the red marker has disappeared because the metadata field has a value. So we have fixed the error here. The one below is access mode sufficient. This is an interesting one because it accepts multiple values. So let's pick textual. As you can see, we now have a token inside the global field. Click on it again or with the keyboard, and I can choose another value, such as visual. I now have two values in this field, textual and visual. The red marker is, of course, the orange marker, which signified a warning, has now disappeared because we have valid values in this field. The one below is accessibility feature. Let's pick one, such as annotations. Accessibility hazard, let's use flashing for the sake of this demonstration. And accessibility summary, this is a text field. I can enter any strings of character. Let's type in, this is my accessibility summary. And it is a text field that accepts line breaks. I can have multiple lines in this piece of information, as you can see here. Now let's have a look again at the list of predefined metadata fields at the very bottom of the pop-up window. And let's choose certified by. I'm adding it and I'm filling in a value. This is me, Daniel. Let's choose certifier credential. This is an interesting field because, as Avnish presented, it accepts any arbitrary strings of characters. Let's say my credential is myself. Okay, this is a joke, of course. Just an arbitrary value. This field also accepts a link, and we'll see this in a second. But first, let's save our editing session. Press the Save button. And as I do this, the evaluation is rerun on the publication so that I have an up-to-date version of the accessibility report. Scrolling down the metadata tab, I can now see that there are no more violations. I have fixed all of the problems. I have informed the missing required metadata. I have also provided the accessibility sufficient recommended field. And I can see that there are 3 missing accessibility metadata fields which are optional. So they're not errors, but ACE lets me know that these are still missing. So I can go back to the editor and fix this. That's not a problem. For example, we have the conforms to. Let's go back and add conforms to. Add it with the plus button. And I'm now presented with the list of 3 predefined values. We have WCAG single A, double A, and triple A. As it turns out, this is also a field that accepts a completely arbitrary value, so that in the future, when there are other standards, in addition to WCAG A, double A, triple A, I can just enter that in the text field. But for now, let's pick WCAG double A. We'll save again. The accessibility evaluation is rerun in ACE, and the results are in. So I'm now happy with this. There are 2 missing accessibility fields, but they are optional, and I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to save the results of all those edits. Just have to press the Save button. It'll take a few seconds for the EPUB to be repackaged, and there it is. The file system Explorer shows me my EPUB file, and it is now remediated. I have fixed the metadata issues. Because I'm a curious person, and I'm sure you are too, let's have a look at the package.opf file that is the central manifest for this publication. There it is. So we're going to take a look at the source code, so to speak, of the publication, the XML syntax that where the metadata is encoded. So I'm just going to pick my text editor here, increase the font size so that you can see it as well. There we are. So this is the XML syntax for the metadata. I've selected here the metadata that was already in the book. We have not changed that. It is completely untouched. However, we have added this chunk of metadata here. As you can see, we have the certified by with a value. We have the certified credential, which I was joking about earlier on. This is an arbitrary value. And you can see it's not a link. Interestingly, certified credential can be a link. It can point to an external resource that defines what the credential is. And I'll go back to that in a minute, so keep that in mind. But let's go further down the list. You can see that the XML syntax defines some metadata fields, as well as a link, the conforms to link, which points to an external resource, which is the WCAG AA conformance level. All right, so let's go back to the editor. Let's have a quick look at credential. There it is. So if I now change credential to a link or URL, http://example.com/credential, just save it as it is. The evaluation is rerun on the publication. And if I now save the EPUB once again, it will be repackaged. I can now have a look at the XML package OPF once again, just to make sure it's all good. Increase the font size so you can see. There we are. And now credential has become a link. You can see that it is not just a metadata field anymore. It is a link in the EPUB package OPF. As you can see, this is very complicated. Very few people know how to edit the XML syntax of a package file in an EPUB publication. And that's exactly why we created the metadata editor in ACE app. This is to make it a lot easier in the production workflow to remediate metadata, accessibility metadata. So there I am. This is the end of my demo of ACE. I'm going to go back to the slide deck. And I'm going to hand over the microphone to Avnish. So we go for it.
Thanks, Daniel, for this wonderful demonstration. Just one clarification, when you said WCAG AA, what does it mean EPUB accessibility level WCAG AA?
Yes, this is the idpf.org URL that points to the WCAG AA conformance level.
Yeah, so thanks. That's EPUB accessibility level AA that I had in the slide, just to make the things clear in minds of the audience that we are talking about the same things. So wonderful presentation, that's wonderful demonstration, Daniel. So I would like to summarize that this is the overview. Today we understood why it is important to make your reader realize that your publication has the great accessibility, what publishers need to do it, and what the retailers need to do for it. So I will also like to mention at the end that this is a long-term work. Definitely you will be getting the results, the first version of these documents, the guidance pretty soon, but the work will go for quite a while. This is because it takes years or maybe months to harmonize the different metadata formats. And there are many metadata formats in the world. Onyx schema.org are the popular one. We also have Mark 21, and there may be more. But all this work is only possible if we have good participation. So if you are interested in participating, maybe you are a content producer, or maybe you are a retailer or distributor, or maybe you work on the metadata formats. then you can participate by joining the EPUB 3 community group in W3C. Just remember that soon it will be renamed to the publishing community group in W3C. So before we end, I would like to share my contact details if you want to contact me. Here is my email on the screen, asing@daisy.org, asing@daisy.org for visually impaired users. And here I am also having the link for the DAISY Consortium website and also the link of Inclusive Publishing website, which is the information hub for inclusive publishing and reading. With that, I think we should open the stage for question and answers. Maybe Daniel, you can also have a look how the poll is going.
Yes, indeed. So I'm going to switch to the Swapcard app, and I invite you all in the audience to do the same. Let's have a look at the chat box to see if we can pick up some questions from there. Yes, we do have some questions, so we'll have a look at this. And we have the poll. So the current results are for the, well, let me first of all state the question. The question was, have you used accessibility metadata? There are 4 different answers. Yes, as an end user or an ebook reader, or yes, as a content creator or publisher. So either as a consumer of the metadata or as somebody who produces the metadata. And the same answer with no. No as an end user, no as a content creator. This you can pick multiple answers to this. And at the moment we have 45% yes as a content creator publisher. We have 27% no as a content creator publisher. We have 18% no as an end user or ebook reader, and 9% only as a end user or ebook reader. That's an interesting metric here. As Avnish mentioned at the end of his presentation, in Thorium, the desktop reading system or reading app for Linux, Windows, and Mac, we intend to implement support for the user experience guidelines for displaying the accessibility metadata in the information card for the publications that are loaded in the bookshelf, but also to help discovering publications in the bookshelf that meet certain criteria. So if I'm a user who needs a screen reader, I should be able to filter publications that meet my needs in the bookshelf. So anyway, this was just a side note about our intent to implement support for accessibility metadata in the reading system. So the overwhelming majority is 50% here. Yes, I have encountered accessibility metadata as a content creator and a publisher.
I think that's a very good result. The audience have good awareness about accessibility metadata. It's such a privilege to have such a learned audience. Great.
Please feel free to add your vote. You have 40 minutes left according to the timer here, basically to the top of the hour, which is now in 15 minutes. So we have a quarter of an hour to take in questions. Let me have a look down the chat box here. So I'm sorry, it's going to take a little bit of time for me to...
You can go directly to the questions tab.
Yes, that'd be easier. So in chronological order, I think... Not quite. So I'll take the one from the top here. Will ACE also support the creation of ONIX metadata? Well, the straight answer is at this stage, there is nothing on the roadmap that sorry, I'm reading other questions here as well. So there's nothing on the roadmap about ONIX metadata. But this is certainly something that we could consider. So I would invite you to file an issue in the GitHub issue tracker, because the more visibility we give to concrete feature requests such as this, the better it is for the community as a whole. So rather than private messaging by email or this chat box, I would very much like to invite you to use the GitHub issue tracker to give some visibility and weight to these questions.
Mm-hmm. Another fact here is that ACE is editing the EPUB and is adding the metadata which is embedded inside the EPUB publication. While Onyx has a different kind of workflow, many times the Onyx metadata is not added by the publisher. It is added further down in the supply chain, maybe by a certifier, maybe by some other entity before it gets to the distributor and the retailer. And we will also like to know how ACE fits in that workflow. So this is the broad answer, that these Onyx and schema.org are added with the different workflows. So we will need to do some investigation how adding support for Onyx in ACE would be helpful for the publishing supply chain.
So this was a question from Gregorio. Thank you, Gregorio. Marian asks, can the metadata editor in ACE app also edit other metadata, like author, title, ISBN? This is a great question. And it's a question we ask ourselves when we implemented support for the accessibility metadata. In principle, it is possible, but in this first iteration, we wanted to keep the user interface simple as possible to really promote the accessibility metadata standard itself. We do not want ACE app to become a general purpose EPUB editor, or even if restricted to metadata, it would become more general purpose if we enabled editing other types of metadata. So that's a part of the answer. The other part is general or generic EPUB metadata is actually quite a bit more complex than accessibility metadata. If you're familiar with the EPUB standard, you'll know that the XML syntax in the package OPF is at times overwhelmingly complicated. So I won't go into too much detail, but again, this justifies why we didn't want to do it in this first iteration. But yeah, this is a very good question. Thank you, Marian. Ted, do you know of any library initiatives that do not only want to show accessibility metadata, but also offer the user a possibility to filter on certain accessibility features of publications in large catalogs? Avnish, do you have any insight as to catalog level metadata?
Well, this is already in the scope. This guidance document can guide you how to do it. And we have not seen the implementation yet, but this is something that we will add to when we interact with VitalSource or with the other people who are presenting, other retailers. Maybe this is something that we should be advocating for. It would be very helpful if we can have a filter. Just to repeat, the guidance document definitely support this scenario, that you should be having the filter for filtering out. And this was a use case which was put forward for Gregorio. But when it comes to implementation, we will wait a little to see the implementation to come up.
Thank you, Ted, for the question. The next one down the list is from Jens, or I believe it's pronounced Jens, but I could be wrong, sorry. Does the certification report follow a schema or a template, or can that be an arbitrary document? Is an ACE report sufficient, or rather not?
I would say ACE report is not sufficient, because ACE is a tool that helps in accessibility conformance. It cannot say that the publication is conforming to the accessibility standard. ACE is a helping tool, and you would need, this is an old, you can say, discussion going on in W3C and many places also, that for you cannot automate the complete accessibility evaluation. ACE is an automated tool which helps you in it. So this is why we created another tool, which is Daisy Smart, which is created by Matt Garish. So that tool provides you a list of checkpoints, what you need to check manually. And then based on your test results, it creates a report. You can use this smart report. You can point to this smart report from the metadata, but I would say that ACE report is not sufficient. So at the same time, you can also augment the smart report with the certification information that you have. So you can use the report from Smart and augment with all the certification information to maintain a uniform kind of type of template. There is no hard and fast rule. How you need to do it, this is up to you, but Smart Tool provides one example. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for the list of questions in the chat. Am I right, Laurent? Do you know?
Yes, I think so also.
Let me see. There is a question in the chat box. It's not tagged as a question in the tab dedicated to questions. So this is from Ivan. Hello, Ivan. Shouldn't schema and accessibility, or A11Y, the short form of the accessibility word, appear in the XMLNS statement in the generated OPF file? So unlike DC colon identifier, for example, which is a XML element with its own namespace. So in order for the XML file to be valid, it has to declare the namespace prefix. The story is different for metadata prefixes in the values or the names of the fields, sorry, such as, for example, conforms to or access mode sufficient. They all have a prefix, but this prefix is not part of the XML validation. It is optional in the EPUB specification. There is a prefix attribute placed at the top root element of the package OPF file, which can optionally specify prefixes that are not already defined internally by the specification. So I'll stop here. It's very technical, but Ivan is a very technical person too. Yeah. So I wanted to properly answer this question. Scrolling down the list, or up rather, here.
And I see a last question from Marianne. One more question from Marianne, which is, accessibility metadata is mostly intended for sales, retailers to customers, isn't it? So why also place accessibility metadata inside the EPUB when creating the file? Will the info not only be read, extracted by a reading system? So this is this is a question which is interesting, because yes, the initial use of accessibility metadata is to provide information for catalogs, libraries, booksellers, so that people can buy or not buy, hire or not hire a book depending their adaptability, the way they can read or not read it. But when somebody gets, for example, an EPUB as a file and enters it in an application that has a cataloging system like Thorium, for example, but it's also true for iBooks on Mac, or any desktop or mobile application that can handle lots of files. We think it is also very interesting for the user to be able to filter by accessibility metadata, or visualize the accessibility information when he looks at the details of the ebook. So it can be a matter of search, matter of filtering, or only matter of visualizing the info panel of the book. So we think that yes, having accessibility information inside the EPUB is useful also. Daniel, Avnish, do you want to complete?
Absolutely right. You gave a good answer. The ONIX metadata, the feeds will be there for the website, for the retailer, but the internal metadata will go along EPUB anywhere the EPUB is, and reading systems will be able to pick up from it. If you have the reading system which picks up the local bookshelf, you can use the filters, as one of the question was there about the filtering. They can use the filters based on the accessibility metadata and use it. So it is important to have the internal metadata in the EPUB publications.
Yes. Just to throw in a couple of keywords here, of course, bibliographic metadata travels along the supply chain. But here we're really talking about making sure that the end product, which matters to the end users, the publication package itself, contains sufficient information to inform accessibility conformance.
Yep. Filtering is a big use case. Thanks to I think Ted asked this question. That was a good question, and that's the target that retailers is not only display the user-friendly metadata, they also allow filtering on this basis. And if Thorium allows this filtering in the future in the bookshelf, I think that would be great. It would be great implementations.
I suppose one question that just came to mind is, in Thorium, we support OPDS catalogs. And at this point in time, OPDS transports or describes some metadata about the publications that it lists, that it catalogs. It'd be interesting to see in the future, as the accessibility metadata becomes more and more popular and more adopted in the supply chain, how much of that information could be preserved in the OPDS feeds, so that, for example, in Thorium, ahead of time, without having to download publications, we could have a look at the catalog and know more about the accessibility conformance of the publications that are listed in the catalog. So I'm looking at the list of questions we have here as well, offline. Avnish, you've already talked about how much of this is tied to the EPUB format. Well, I will add a piece of information just in case this wasn't clear. In the DAISY knowledge base, we have, I opened up 2 different pages to the DAISY knowledge base. We have some information about how to encode this information in EPUB, but there are also links to how it's implemented in HTML, for example, as microdata.
Yeah.
Well, we're nearly at the top of the hour.
Yes. So maybe we will stop there. And well, thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much to you, Daniel and Avnish, for this bright presentation. And well, let's meet again at 5:30 if you want, for a presentation by Patrick Muller about visual narrations. So the notion of advanced, enriched ebooks with video, audio, images, etc. Goodbye and see you soon.
Bye-bye, everyone.